thank you for inviting me to this forum. I'm very excited to talk today. I would like to say that I will present only part of the study that I was conducted with my colleague, Professor Nurit Karmi from Tel Hai Academic College. And I hope it will be interesting for you. So I want to start. So today, the current world population is 7.8 billion people as of February 2021. And the big question is, do we have any boundaries? Can we continue in this way forever? So scientists from diverse disciplines agree that human population growth dramatically contributes to environmental crisis, and it plays a major factor in the damage caused to the environment, as well as to the degradation in the quality of life and the well-being of people around the world. And as it says here, oh, sorry. If there are too many people, even the most wisely managed technology will not keep the environment from being overstressed. Most of the scientists agree that the impact of human activity on the environment is a multiplication of three major components: population size, affluence, and technology. They might not agree about the proportion of population size, but they agree that it is a major factor. The big one major claim says that it's not the population growth which is the problem, it's the lifestyle of human being which is the problem. And Professor Paul Ehrlich answered this claim as follows. The argument whether it's population or consumption is like arguing whether the area of a rectangle comes from more its length or its width. It means that it's both. Paul Ehrlich wrote few decades ago his book, The Population Bomb. This book was criticized, but other scientists have evidence today also that population growth is really a problem. Population growth as the ignored elephant in the room. In this caricature, you see a critique regarding ignoring the issue of population growth in the Paris climate change agreement and summit that was held in 2015. About 200 countries signed that they agree and commit to reduce the greenhouse gases in the next decades. But the issue of population growth was not there, was absent from its discussion, and this is what this caricature shows. Because I conducted my research in Israel, it's important to present the following phenomenon. In Israel, there is an unusual fertility rate, which stands at 3.1 children per woman. You can see the green column. And this is the highest fertility rate in the OECD countries, and it's almost one full child above the next highest fertility countries, which are Mexico and Turkey. You can see the US in the ninth place. There are many reasons for that. One major reason is the pronatalist agenda of the State of Israel, which means that the State of Israel encourages birth rate and support it. But there are other reasons that I cannot go into, but they will be presented in the finding. According to the literature, population growth is absent from the worldwide public discourse, from the national agendas and institution policies of many countries. And there are several reasons. found in the literature, such as that this topic is complex, controversial, is not understood by the general public, contradicts social cultural norms and religious faith. When we are looking about how people perceive a severity of problem, what are their risk perceptions? So based on the literature, there are demographic, sociological, psychological, and personality factors. And here you can see several of them. For example, how certain is the problem? What is the imminence of the problem? What is the spatial proximity of the problem? Is there any potential for a personal harm? Is the problem predictable? And what is the intense of a negative emotion? We will continue with these factors in the findings. Scientists, science educators, and environmental educators mostly agree that population growth should be addressed through the education system. They claim that it's a necessary topic to address in environmental education, and that this topic is as important as other environment problems such as global climate change. And they further claim that the goal is improving or developing the learners' environmental or social environmental literacy with respect to population growth and its consequences on the earth and on people or human beings. However, we know from the literature again that most teachers struggle to teach about population growth as a problem. And according to the literature, teachers are stressed because of several reasons. For example, they think that the topic is under scientific and political debate, that the topic is controversial, complex, and transdisciplinary in nature, and therefore hard to teach. It contradicts their own perception and attitudes toward population growth as a problem. Teachers also indicate that they don't know how to teach this issue, and that the topic is in most cases absent from national curricula. So this was a very speed introduction that led us, the researchers, to ask two main questions. Do teachers perceive population growth as an environmental problem or as something, or as a factor that's causing environmental problems? And do environmental and non-environmental teachers differ in their perceptions? And the other question was, how do environmental and non-environmental teachers perceive embedding the issue of population growth into their teaching, why they do it or not, or why do they don't do it? We used a mixed method research. We had 200 participants. About 100 participants were environmental teachers and the other were non-environmental teachers. Environmental teachers were the teachers that reported in the questionnaire that they had environmental courses or that they were exposed explicitly to environmental topic during their academic studies, while the non-environmental teachers reported that they were not exposed to environmental courses or topics. We used a questionnaire with closed and open-ended and interviews. And today I will present several results from the questionnaire. So let's move to the finding a little bit. So first finding is that environmental teachers have higher system thinking. If you look at this table, you can see the distribution of teachers' perception of population growth as an environmental program. And among the environmental teachers, population growth is perceived as an environmental problem, definitely highly and significantly highly than among the non-environmental environmental teachers. More specifically, the environmental teachers had more developed system thinking. Almost 60% of them understood that population growth influences both ecosystems and human-oriented system, while only 20% of the non-environmental teachers perceived PG in this way. I'll continue with some examples. So what's going on with the 17% of the e-teachers and 40% of the non-e-teachers that did not perceive PG as a problem. So we found out that they pointed out mostly human-centered reason. For example, I will read two examples. PG might indeed be problematic. However, in our small country, surrounded by many enemies, the Jewish culture of population growth is a blessing. PG is a positive thing. The problem is created if services such as education, health, and road infrastructure are insufficient for the growing population. So very human-centered reasons in most cases. Here you can see in this table the several attributes that I presented earlier. And here you can see that that the severity of population growth as a problem was perceived more highly by the environmental teachers, and this this was a significant difference. This was except for the predictability factor, and if we will look at the values of the non-environmental teachers, we could see that the teachers somehow responded neutrally, but the environmental teachers did not respond neutrally. So there is another difference between the two groups in their perception of population growth as as a problem. Then the next finding is that e-teachers are more likely to include a population growth in their teaching. Maybe it's not surprising. And in this table, we can see first of all, what are teachers' consideration to include environmental topics in their teaching, not only population growth. And we found that there are three considerations: issue-oriented, student-oriented, and teacher-oriented. Regarding the issue-oriented and student-oriented, we found that between 40% and 60% of teachers from both groups include environmental topics according to their high severity, high severity as environmental problems, and their suitability and effectiveness in developing students' environmental citizenship. However, we did find some differences between the group, with connected to two other considerations: strong connectedness of the topics to students' emotion and daily life. And teachers also said that that they include environmental topic according to their own strong connectedness of topics to their daily life, interest, and their capacity of teaching the subject. So this was more general about environmental topics and the consideration to include it. More specifically about population growth, as you can see here, we found after the analysis of teachers' explanation for supporting or not supporting the inclusion of population growth in school teaching, that teachers have three main attitudes: supporters, age-dependent supporters, and opponents. And we found significant differences between the two groups. Almost, let's say, 2/3 of the environmental teachers support inclusion of population growth in teaching, and only 14% oppose this. And vice versa, and another different picture is presented by the non-environmental teachers, which we found about 40% of supporter and opponents. So, excuse me, when we looked at the teacher explanation for supporting the inclusion of population growth in their school teaching, we found interesting explanation. in both groups. For example, it's important to seek solution to this problem. Education is the key. Today's students are tomorrow's responsible parents. And another example, this is a very sensitive topic. With young children, I would focus on changing consumption habits. I will not read the other, and I will move ahead to the third piece of finding. So we found that all the teachers reported similar concern regarding engaging students in discourse around population growth as a controversial issue. So we did not find concern that were inclusive for environmental teachers, or in other examples, or in other concern that was exclusive for the other group. So the examples of teachers' concern, you can see here that they represent several themes: political demographics, societal norms, complexity of the topic, and negative feelings or fears. And I can read the example, they are short. Discussing demography in Israel is taboo. It's the Jewish uterus versus the Arab uterus. Small or child-free families are not viewed positively by the Israeli society. I'm afraid of causing conflict and objection in class. Young children may feel they are a burden to the world. I think I'll go to the conclusion, unfortunately, because of the time. We have, of course, many conclusions, but one conclusion relates to the role of knowledge. And we found that there are two sides for knowledge. On the one side, the environmental background of the teachers in their academic studies did influence their perception, widen their perception about population growth and its connection to the environmental crisis. It also increases their motivation, willingness, teaching capacities, and their confidence to include this topic into their teaching. However, knowledge ability is not enough. We found in both groups other factors that inhibit including this topic in their teaching, such as socio-cultural norms and values, pronatalist political ideologies, religiosity, and the absence of the topic in the public discourse, and some other factors. So if I would move on to the implication, so I summarize here three. Good instruction of social scientific issues and population growth is considered as a social scientific issue. It requires appropriate teacher training with respect to knowledge, skills, and pedagogical strategies. Population growth, we claim, or we suggest that population growth should be addressed on a global scale, but also it's important to consider the particular local political, cultural, and ethical barriers. And we also recommend that non-environmental teachers should also be exposed to environmental studies during their teacher training in order to develop their system thinking and their environmental risk literacy. And we claim that this topic should not be studied or addressed only with a science student or teachers, or biology, or geography. It fits everyone. That's it. Very short and very partial for now. Should I stop sharing?
Yes. Thank you, Iris. Thank you very much. And now we are open to questions.
This topic is very emotional. It's very, very emotional. So if you have some rejection and resistance, come and okay, and speak.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Which grade these children? I didn't understand. It's high school or elementary school? I didn't understand.
The teachers that were included in the in the study were preschool teachers, elementary school teachers, and also secondary school teachers. We didn't separate them into different groups because of the sample that was not very high. But it's a good question, because in their explanation, some of the teachers did address the age of the students or the kids in relation to population growth.
Thank you, Gilad. Michal, do you have another question?
No.
Gilad, yes.
Hi. I wanted to know if you addressed the answers, if it was part of the problem that they didn't want to talk about the issue, or if you didn't address the answers.
What do you mean if I looked for the answer? You mean
I mean that I think part of the problem that the teachers don't teach about this problem is the problematic answers that may occur. So I wanted to know if you addressed the answer as a problem, or you didn't.
We didn't judge the teachers' answers as problematic. It was evident that the teachers reported that this topic is controversial, and some of them are afraid to touch this subject, especially with small kids. But also with youngsters in high school. Not every teacher agreed that this subject should be part of his or her teaching. But it was interesting to note in the interviews that not only science teachers or biology teachers understood the importance of including this topic into class. There were also social studies teachers that understood that it's not only for science teaching, and everybody should be exposed. Okay, did I answer your point?
We have a question from Christina. Maybe you want to state or not a comment. Christina, maybe you want to say it?
Sure. Apologies for the noise in the background. We have online schooling going on behind me. I was just saying that it seems like, Iris, you mentioned that this is a sensitive, controversial topic, and that it's very clear that the teachers that you interviewed also sense this. But it seems like perhaps the real elephant in the room is really the discussions around reproductive rights, sexual education, women's empowerment potentially. And I'm curious, how this came up or did not come up, or how, what are some potential solutions to resolving this, because it's intricately tied with the notion of population growth.
Thank you for your question. Well, actually, the full questionnaire and the research that came after this research, the students who conducted sits here, Naama. So the full questionnaire also added items about teachers' attitudes about human rights and women rights, and the that the state cannot say how many kids you will have. So all kinds of attitudes that are related to political, human rights, and so on. And what we found out is that in this sense, with these attitudes, the only difference that was evident in the results, that the only difference between environmental teachers and non-environmental teachers was concerning the environmental-based attitudes. The other attitudes were similar in both groups. Also in the interviews, the interviewees talked about what you are saying. What you said previously about human rights and that family, decision about how big is your family is not the business of the state, and other claims.
Thank you. Orit, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. It was so interesting and important issue, Iris. I wonder about the system thinking issue. In many research, we don't really see connection between the level of sophistication or argumentation or cognitive skills or system thinking and ethical or environmental literacy even. So could it be that someone will still hold non-environmental perspective of this issue, but still hold the very sophisticated system thinking skills or argumentation skills?
Yes, it could be. Statistically, what we found is that the environmental teachers had a more developed understanding, system understanding with respect to what are the consequences of population growth, and they better understood the chain effect or the domino effect that population growth, if there is an overpopulation, so the impact is for example environmental degradation, and then it goes to specific pollutions and degradation in biodiversity and so on. So statistically, there were more environmental teachers who perceived it. It doesn't mean that, as you mentioned, that ethically or when you go to their moral perception, they were willing to agree that birth rate should be stopped or should be reduced or should be controlled.
Thank you, Jeremy. You are very quiet. You raise your hand.
Yeah, so I know your study is about high school teachers, but I was wondering if you could also comment on academics, college professors. Like, I find, if you even raised someone like Paul Ehrlich, you could easily be labeled eugenicist just for mentioning his name. So I'm curious, to what extent do you think like professors are adverse to talk about population growth because they're going to be labeled a racist or sexist? Again, given the racist, sexist oppression associated with population control policies, to what extent is it they're afraid they're going to offend their colleagues who had children or want to have children? Or are they mostly, do you think, just not exposed to how detrimental world ecosystem health is with an ever-growing population, or anything else?
Well, I believe that both both directions might be true, at least for Israeli professors or teachers. Okay, I don't know how it goes in the US or other countries. I'm curious to to know, maybe in the small discussions, but for sure in the Israeli context, teachers are not encouraged to talk about this subject, as well as about other controversial subjects. So because they are, at least in Israel, they are strongly connected to political issues or disputes or demographic issues with the majority of Jewish population versus the minority of Arabs and other minorities. So it's very, very sensitive, and teachers and professors really in many cases run away from this hot potato.
Thank you. Hagit, you're waiting too, and then Darren.
I was thinking many times this falls on the curriculum and tools that teachers have. So are there any tools at all in Israel for teaching this for the teachers? Strategies, content, anything?
Good question. There are in geography, for example, or even in biology, there are chapters or specific concepts For example, in geography, the concept of overpopulation or population growth is really studied, is in the curriculum, but raising dilemmas is less common. I think that that a very useful tool or strategy is raising dilemmas, but not dilemmas which have good and bad guys only. A dilemma that which has diverse of actors, and through raising dilemmas, the student could think of it, could read about it, could present their diverse perception. I think students do it, and in other subjects, in science education, in teachers in genetics, for example, there are social scientific issues that are well discussed in the classroom. So I think that the same could be with population growth as a social scientific topic.
But it still doesn't exist as a program,
no.
Or as a something that as a program that's written. So it's not there yet.
No, there are no, as far as I know, and as far as I looked at the curricula, there are no explicit objectives for teachers to talk about population growth as a problem, or as a responsible for the environmental crisis, or as a major responsible for the environmental crisis.
Thanks.
Thank you, Darren, and then Attila.
Iris, thank you so much. I have a question about if your participants overtly mentioned anything about like the religious implications for population growth, and if they're, we may know that perhaps environmental education is more aligned with progressive ideology, or even maybe more a secular life in Israel. I'm just curious to know if that part of the conversation was included in answers around population growth and environmental education ideologies. So I'm curious to hear your response to that.
Yes, it definitely came out. We could not split the participant into religious and secular or traditional, because the sample was not big enough. But in teachers' explanations and written answers, and in the interviews, even the less religious teachers, several of them did raise the conflict with the religious faith, and in Hebrew it said I don't know how to say it in English, but the encourage of reproduction, that is a command in the Genesis book. Yes, they raised it, and I found myself I think that it was similar. When it was similar to the problem of evolution education, that when you want to deal with it, a similar concern raised. But also we found in the research many similarities with teacher perception, and even religious one, concerning the climate change. I found very many similarities between these two topics.
Yeah. Thank you, Attila.
Thank you very much. I'm very interested if you have any international comparison of this data, because I'm coming from a country where the population is actually decreasing, and if there is anything about population growth in Hungary, in education, it is about to increase the Hungarian population and not to decrease it. So that's I'm interested if you have any suggestion for including population growth issues in a country where the population is decreasing, actually.
Thanks for the question. Well, actually, this is my next step, to find collaborators from other countries, because you're not the first one, and of course I've read about it, and it's well known that in European countries they want to encourage the population and not decrease the population, because they don't see that there is a problem of overpopulation. So this is the next step, but I know that there are differences. That's why I emphasized in the beginning of my presentation the unique or the unusual phenomenon in Israel in this sense, because we are also considered, at least considered as a Western country, but in this subject, this is something very unusual.
I think we will. Oren, do you want to ask something before we?
Yeah, I know we want to move to the breakout session.
No, it's okay.
Iris, first of all, thank you for the talk. This was fantastic, and I had the chance to look at the paper before, so I appreciate hearing you speaking about the logics of the different pieces. But I wanted to make a quick comment, or maybe it's a question to connect what Orit was asking and what Christina was asking about system thinking, because it seems like while you find that the environmental ed teachers have more system thinking around environmentalism, it seems like they don't have the system thinking that we need when we talk about sustainability, that connect the human, the economy, and the environment together. Because if they had that, I would expect that they would show different attitudes on the issues of women's rights, empowerment, etc. So I wonder if that's the next part. Is that the next paper we are going to see, something that will connect these attitudes as well, or are you moving on to increasing the sample size? I'm just curious about how to address this puzzle around the system thinking piece.
This is the next step. This is the second study that really connects between what you have said, teachers' attitudes concerning all the issues that you raised, and their system or not system thinking with respect to environmental problem. And I think this is a good comment and a good direction to focus on. So thanks.
Great. So we will move on, and we will now break out. Oren, I think 6 rooms it will be good, and we will have a small discussion in the breakout rooms. And we have 3 questions. We would like to have some interaction and really engaging discussion. So if you can introduce yourself and then assign someone to take some notes. I put in the chat this link to the Google Doc that we collect all the discussion from all our meetings, and we have 3 questions about to look about if in your country there is a consideration of population growth, and do you think it's important and why, and maybe how we can connect it to climate change. So this is some of the questions. If there are other questions, of course, more than welcome to raise it. And we will meet here in about 25 minutes, half an hour back to conclude our discussion. Great. So we will be happy to hear some thoughts about your group discussion, some ideas that you discussed in your group. Is someone from group 1 want to share with us? Tomer, do you raise your hand?
Yes.
Great.
In my group, I started to say something, and before I complete my sentence, I will summarize what the group say. If I if I can explain this in English, what we say is that in Israel, we talk also in Israel, that in Israel we have the Holocaust story and the wars story, and many אירועים,
events.
events that make us need to survive and make more children. And we need to have more children because we need to survive, and etc. And I wanted to say, before this, someone say that that the footprint is sometimes it's related to the number of peoples in the family, but sometimes in small families they do more damage to the environment from another families. So I wanted to say that I forgot. I wanted to say that no, in Israel we have very well-being, very well well-being,
Very high well-being.
very high well-being. So it makes us confidence, or make us opportunity to make children. This is what I think, because we have good economic, although there was and Corona and stuff like this, we have the opportunity to have children because the life is good. We have problems, but the life, but we have the sources. No sources. משאבים.
Resources.
מה?
Resources.
Okay, yes, resources. This is what I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there other groups that want to share with us some thoughts? No one? Then I will ask, like a teacher, I will ask you.
I can say.
Oh, Jeremy, great, thank you. Save me.
So we were a bit off topic, but Eti and I'm sorry, was it Gilad and Eti? They really enlightened me about Israeli politics. I had a lot of questions about the politics going on with Netanyahu, and so that was very informative. And but we did talk a little bit about why people are resistant to talk about population. And I pointed out, like in the United States, there's a historiation of like racist population control, right? Like where like a lot of people were sterilized against their will. And so part of the resistance, I think, in the United States talking about it is that racist history associated with forced involuntary sterilization in the United States. And the idea, if you're talking about population control, that like, you know, it's hard to divorce that from its racist associations.
Great, thank you. And I think the politics is related to that. I don't think it's off the question. I think it's totally part of the issue. Other group or someone? Not really yet. Darren, yes.
Yeah. So in our group, we had a pretty interesting conversation, a bit of a comparison between United States and Israel. And I think the general gist of the conversation is a lot of the topics regarding population is very sensitive because it intersects with religious identity, with gender rights, with reproductive rights. And so what we found is that a lot of times teachers or even curriculum designers are forced to globalize conversations so that there can be a way to talk about it in a more generalized sense and rather than a context specific sense. So we talked about Utah and perhaps the sensitivity of talking about with religion and population growth is very sensitive. So having some successes when talking about human rights instead of context specific drivers is perhaps an intersection also environmental ethics. Rather than talking about population growth. So it is fascinating to think about the other directions into this conversation that might not be so context specific driven.
Thank you. Great, thank you. More comments? You can say something even if it's not related to your group conversation or discussion.
I guess I could say one more thing.
Yeah, Jeremy.
We also talked about how we noticed in some of our conversations and research that young children seem to be more comfortable talking about it than a lot of adults are as an issue. And I'm going to share all with you something I've never shared before as an anecdote. I didn't publish about this, but when I was interviewing students about like environmental issues and, you know, things like population and sustainability came up, one fourth grader, I'll never forget what he said. I was talking about like solutions and what can be done. And he says, we should put electric batteries on planes, right? And I'm like, and I was like, oh, and this is a fourth grader. Like, you might remember that I said, like, it's very hard to put an electric battery on a plane because it's, you know, the energy density to propel a plane with the battery, you'd need so many batteries. It's not really feasible. He's like, exactly, that's the point. We'll solve two problems. We'll stop the plane from flying and we'll get rid of the people on the plane as well. So, like, that's like the level of like dark brilliance with which I think some students are thinking and talking about population in ways we adults might be averse to.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Iris, do you want to say something? Oh.
Well, it was a good opportunity to you know, to present it in front of Israelis as well as the other countries. And for me, I would like, you know, to call for you know, if there are other students or researchers here who are interested in continue this research and make it international, because I know that you know, the finding are not necessarily will be the same. So write to me, suggest yourself, you know, for conducting you know, maybe to administer questionnaires or join the research. I would be very happy. And it was interesting to hear you in the small discussion and also here. And you know, I heard the same explanations and you know, and reasons that people here raised as we found, you know, in the interviews and in the questionnaires about the topic. The same issues were raised here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think if we are looking, so we're trying to look at this workshop in diverse ways and diverse, unless someone wants to say something more before I want to point out some things that are more general than what we discussed today. Before I will say it, I will see if someone else wants to say something. Yes, Oren.
So Daphne, before we have more general comments, I wonder, and that's a question for Iris, but it's also for the rest of the group. It seems like we are always dealing with topics in our field of sustainability and environmentalism. We always deal with topics that are controversial. I'm thinking about climate change, I'm thinking about evolution, I'm thinking about, in some context, I'm thinking about an environmental educator in Texas trying to talk against the fossil fuel industry. That will be very controversial. So I wonder whether there is something unique about population growth as a topic, or is it really another case of these hot topics that are just difficult to talk about? And I wonder whether Iris have thought about it, but if others, because if it is unique, then maybe we should talk a little bit about the uniqueness. But if it's not, then we might want to think about a broader system or framework of thinking about these hot topics that goes beyond just the population growth and climate change.
I see Daniel. Daniel, yes, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that, and I think it's I I find it to be just like climate change. I find it to be a topic that needs to be unpacked, and unpacked a lot, like really dissect in different contexts. You can tell that here the conversation was focused on Israel and the US because, you know, this is our context, this is our lingo. But I think that to help talk about these difficult topics or you know, is I think that dissect them and try to make them, trying to build bridges, right, with ways in which a Texas teacher can talk about it, and you know, aligning with his identity and his context.
I see Orit and then Susan. Okay, Orit, and then
thank
Susan.
you all for your comments. I think that for me personally, I would like to embrace the cultural responsive pedagogy when dealing with such an issue. It's very familiar for me as a biologist, like evolution. Personally, you know what is the right mechanism. Nevertheless, you know how difficult it is to teach such issue in the overall population in order to achieve what we call informed decisions. So I think cultural responsive pedagogy is in a framework that really helps you to be more modest and how you relate to population growth or evolution. But for me, they are in the same level.
Can I ask a follow-up, Orit? Because I don't think we ever talked in this group about cultural relevant or cultural sensitive pedagogy. Can you say a little bit more about how you see the connection? I think it will be useful for everybody.
Yeah. When we speak about cultural responsive pedagogy, we ask ourselves, what is the cognitive model a person holds? What are the norms that influence those cognitive models? What kind of cultural attributes are related to? How is self-identity is related to the issue that are in discourse? And there are many papers more recently, like the last 5 years, on cultural responsive, all kind of discourse, dialogue teaching, and meaningful learning experiences that promote and scaffold understanding, but it must be very open. It's not like you can convince someone to doing a replacement. It's more refinement. And in this process of refinement, you can negotiate the meaning of what is mean population growth, but it's not really a replacement. And this is something that many environmental educators have problem with. They really want to convince, and it will not work. This is my opinion, of course.
Thanks.
Thank you. Susan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think Orit said it much better than I can, but I was just answering Oren's question of, is the population topic different than the other hot topics? And I think that Orit said it well. I think in a way it is, a yes and a no. If you want to talk about it from the environmental perspective, then I think it's just another hot topic. But what population growth does is that, as we mentioned earlier before the breakout rooms, it brings up the issue of fertility choice and personal freedoms and women's rights. And when you get into that discussion, you bring up the cultural norms and their expectations and things like that. So that, to me, that aspect of the issue makes it a unique problem. However, I think it could be dealt with as just another hot topic as well if we stick with the environmental implications and don't address personal choice. So let's talk about it as a global or community issue and not a personal issue.
Great, thank you. So we have 3 more minutes. So now I can wrap up what I wanted to do 10 minutes ago. But I wanted to say that we are looking, and actually it relates to your question, and we're trying to look at this workshop from really diverse angle about sustainability and about research about it, quantitative tools and qualitative, and from the perspective of a population growth, or from the perspective of climate change, or from the perspective of our imaginary world. I think everything is connected. I don't think it's separate worlds. I think it's something that we're trying to unpack it and to look at this in deeply and to understand it better. But I think it's part of the same holistic issue that we're trying to tackle and to discuss and to understand. So it's an answer to a question, but also something that we're trying to do in our workshop, and to look in a specific direction, but then to open it up to the other perspectives. So I think we will conclude here 2 minutes early. And we will be very happy to meet you next time with Buddha and other ways of thinking. So thank you to all of you, and see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. It was really interesting.
Bye.
Thank you, Iris.
Yeah, thank you, Iris.
Thank you, Iris.
Thank you.
It was fabulous.
Thank you. Good evening and good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.